Seems super hot in here. Is it really cold out or is it about the same? Sometimes it gets hot in here when it's cold outside. No response. Tell me, is it hot or cold outside? Thank you. Yes, sir.
No problem with repel.
I thought you were going to say hypergrade. What are you working on the new one, the classes?
Yeah. It's,
It seems to be giving us a problem.
I just reset my workspace to see if it's all and made it worse.
Uh-oh. Because, yeah, it seems like... Oh, great job.
Yeah.
You broke it. It's like, he broke it. What can we do?
Refresh the whole page.
Yeah.
I should fix that.
Now it's gone.
That was long.
Like
gone.
completely or just the weird stuff?
It's fixed now.
Because that was already long gone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are you doing the Raspberry Pi Club thing?
Yeah.
Are you? You guys should do that.
Me and Walker are working on Morse code stuff.
Oh, cool.
We have a program that outputs from a light board, and we're trying to now read that light board through a photoresistor. And it's the photoresistor, how photoresistor works.
Not
Yeah, it's
along
not
with
just like,
that.
oh, it's on, it's off. It's a lot more complicated.
That sounds very interesting.
Because like it's just a little LED light, and it's not like it produces like the same strength of light every single time. It's just putting the breadboard.
So it has to be a range.
Yeah, so we have to have a range in order to measure between on and off. I mean, the Morse code program works great. Like, it works great.
It's all that
we gotta
fancy stuff.
receive the data.
It sounds so fun.
Like last time we basically
There's
just
a
yelled.
threat. I'll shut him off.
We basically just yelled at the computer for 2 hours last time. Right?
You what?
We basically just yelled at the computer.
Careful, that Raspberry Pi will overheat.
We actually kept crashing.
Did it kept crashing? Might have been overheating. My son said at OU they set one up as like they wanted something to stream video because he works with the students who do the nightly news weather broadcast, and so they wanted to be able to live stream. And so he set up this really cheapo kind of solution with a Pi, and he said it ran for like 30 seconds before it just.
In our networking class, we tried the motherboard on the servers because we all try to fix you at the same time. And so we tried the motherboard.
That was an old motherboard.
They were just like it was going, and then everybody stopped. Like at one point, we were like, "It stopped." Like, what happened? And like, it was like, okay, we'll just stop this and do something else. And like, it figured out that the motherboard got fried.
Did anybody smell something? Oh, decline. Somebody's trying to remote control for us. Okay, let's see.
Hey, it was worth a shot.
I've got it. I got it. Don't worry. Okay, I'm going to open Visual Studio. And I'm going to open our project from last time because I want to take another look at it. Now, if you don't have it, don't worry because we'll start over with it from scratch here in a minute. But we want to get this one all working first.
So, real quick, sorry not to interrupt, but I know before I was looking for the videos that you post because I was trying to. I wasn't having any luck. They used to be posted in the modules. Am I looking in the wrong place?
Well, the ones that I post for each day are in the modules. Let me show you. If I can find it. That's, oops, at the very top under this syllabus and schedule.
Oh.
And so I don't know if that's a good place for them.
Oh, I was looking under the actual week.
The week.
Okay, so.
Yeah, so I don't update it each time because I have a really hard time just getting everything done that has to be done.
Oh, I'm sure.
So go to this place. Nope, they should be there. And they're not necessarily going to be there that same day. So you might have to watch the morning class if I've got it posted. I was talking the other day about how long it takes to load, and some students said, well, geez, they're like an hour and a half. Well, yeah, that's what on class is. So they're kind of large to low to medium. You're looking at the wrong class. Not to be a jerk or anything.
No, that would be the first time. Which language is this?
It's that number is so close. It's just that one little digit in there that makes the difference. Oh, it was 131 has two little digits there.
Oh, okay, so then that link takes you to the channel, and you can find it.
Yeah.
All right, perfect, thank you.
Sorry, it's kind of hidden. Okay, hang on. I did something, closed something, messed something up. So you should be able to find your Chapter 5 Audio CD Basic 102 project. That's the one we're going to open. You probably already have yours open. I closed instead of opening. So let me do that again. And I'll get the right one. With this one, we're going to have lots of versions of it. So I have quite a few versions. So I could definitely mess it up. We'll try to minimize that as we go. It's the one we did last time, Chapter 5 Audio CD Basic 102. Yeah, we're going to start over from scratch, and I'll put it on the chat here in just a second. So let's start out looking at our method in our audio CD class. We have a lot in this project, and we want to review all of it. But before we go too much further, we wanted to look at our new class we created. So we decided, remember we were looking at the spheres, and I haven't had a chance to zip that up for you guys. I was working on it, got sidetracked, but I'll get it out there for you because I do think it's great for you to look at that Unity project and see how easy it is to create those instances of the class. So you see how, I like for people to take the game programming class because it really does help you with your object-oriented principles and understanding because it is so object-oriented. But anyways, we created our audio CD class, and then we put in one method in our audio CD class, and then we were able to call that. And in our method, we said that we were going to calculate the value of our audio compilation by doing some sort of made-up formula so that we could have something there to send back. So let's look at that method header for a second, and I want to identify everything on that method header. What is that word public? What is the actual terminology we use to describe what that word is? It could be public, it could be private, it could say protected. What is that?
It's like available to all the.
That's right. No, but close.
Available to anyone that wants to access it.
Access something. Access. You guys are doing so good. Keep going. They call it the access mode. How are we going to let other things access this module, this method? Well, we made this one public. So that means that that other class we have can call it. Great. What about that keyword static? I'm just going to put it in there. Static is going to be like a other keyword because it just has different functionality. So I'm just going to actually describe it that way. It's an other keyword, and in this case, it means the method will be in memory only once. So it doesn't matter how many instances of our CD objects we have, if they go to calculate their value, they'll all be looking at that same method in memory. So we won't have it loaded out there 500 times. Every one of them, though, is going to have to pass it, their cost and their number of tracks to get that information back. Okay.
If you didn't want to do that, would you just submit static or do you have a different keyword?
You would just admit static. So that extra keyword can be kind of a problem because a lot of times we won't have it at all. Yes, sir?
After my keyboard not working.
Uh-oh. Like an important half?
Backspace, return. He uses that one a lot.
Do you want to? Oh, ooh, ooh. Can you Alt F4? Will it let you do Alt F4 to shut it down?
Delete your system 32. Don't do that.
See if it'll let you Alt F4 to close everything, because I bet if we restart it, it'll be okay. Sometimes these computers have maintenance installed and don't restart, so can make them do weird things. Carlene emailed and said she was going to be here. Chris emailed and said she wasn't going to be here. The rest of our front row Republic crew, not sure, maybe it was because ours was gone. They were like, oh, all of the Republic will be shut up. How's it doing? Is it coming back up? All right, so what's that decimal word?
Data return type.
Yep. What about calc value? Yep. And we should really say identifier. That's the actual technical term. Because remember, with our method, since our method signature is comprised of our return type, our method name, and our parameters, the name isn't really as important. We'll call it an identifier. All right, what about this one? I'll just tell you. That beginning parenthesis, that is the beginning of our parameter list. It's important. What about the word decimal at the beginning of our parameter list? It's a data type for what? Of that parameter. Yeah, so let's just say data type of the first parameter, because you guys know it's going to repeat, but for this case it's that first one. And then what about cost? What is it?
It's the variable name.
Yeah. So let's see if we got really technical. We could say it is the first parameter identifier or variable name. Exactly right. Then that comma indicates that our parameter list continues, right? We have more parameters. After that, the int, data type of our next parameter, and then num tracks would be the identifier of that next or second parameter. And again, that would really be our variable name. And then finally, the last thing in our method header is that closing parenthesis. And that is the end of our parameter list. One thing that's really helpful for us as programmers in some ways is that all of this stuff is exactly the same as a method in Java. So it's not exactly the same as a function in Python or C++ or some of those other ones, but we do have some languages that are a little bit similar. Yes, sir?
What sort of things might one put instead of static in that slot?
We will do an override today where we're overriding a method from previously, and that's about it. So we won't see a lot of different options for those optional keywords.
Generally, when in doubt, you probably want static.
Or none. So generally, you would probably want none. We're using static a lot right now because we're calling all these methods from our main method. So since we're limited to that one main method, we're only being able to have one method call. So we have to make them static. As we develop our class, I think it'll be more clear. So let me know if not, because we want to make sure it is. Now, when we look at all this, any other questions? Because I think it's a really good opportunity for us to look at all of these things that we have to use in these nasty method headers. You guys are getting used to them. Well, a couple weeks ago, I thought you were going to like tar and feather me because of them, and now you're doing much better in getting them. So do get used to it, right? So that looks pretty good. We're not too bad there. I want to go back now and look at my tester, our tester class. Couple things about it. Whenever we call our new class, our audio CD class, what is this? How can we have to have this audio CD dot before that method name? What is that?
It's the file path.
It's our class name, right? Our class name. So we're basically telling it where to find our calc value method. Kind of like it's a path. It's a path through our classes. So we're saying in the audio CD class, you should be able to find this calc value method. And I want you to run that. Yes, sir?
Whenever I put that code in, I had to put audio CD basic program dot calc value because I just left the name as program and not audio CD. It wouldn't let me do anything otherwise.
Right. So you had to use whatever you have in there as your identifier. So, yes, sir?
Can we do something like using static with console with that one?
Yeah. Could we do that? Using static audio CD and get rid of that so you guys could.
I'm talking about at the very, very top.
Uh-huh.
We can do that, that's the thing.
Well, it's actually just a class, so it's not a class library. So it's a little bit clunky, but you could. So what do you want to try here? Using static audio CD basic is the name of our namespace. And then I can put that class name. Now, if I do that, I should be able to get rid of the audio CD dot. Is that better? That is a good one for us to try. Now, personally, I don't like that. Why? Because now I don't know which ones come from that other class. But it's totally up to you. And some people like it a whole lot. They don't want to have all of those prefixes in front of things. But so it's totally a matter of preference. If I mouse over calc value, it's going to tell me where it's coming from, that it's in the audio CD. So I'd be able to figure it out. I'm just kind of lazy and I like it coded there. Yes, sir?
It won't let me do using static audio CD basic.
Right, because yours is named that way.
Oh no, it's named that way.
Right, you have to do audio CD basic dot. And then you pick your class. So it doesn't just want your namespace, it wants your namespace and class. All right, now let's try something else. Go to your audio CD class And let's try changing that public to private. I'll go back to my tester, and now I have an error. It says that calc value cannot be accessed because it's private. Now it asks you to show potential fixes and all those great things. You can do that, but it might mess you up. But you can tell right away, it's protection level. Well, we said that was access mode, and here in their help system, they call it protection level. So we can definitely see some inconsistencies like that. But either way, we should be able to tell from this message, calc value is private, and we don't want it to be private because we're trying to access it from outside of the class. So what about if we make calc value protected? Protected is supposed to be a little bit more open. It says that protected gives access to all child classes, but that's not really what we have going on here. We haven't learned about that yet. So protected is going to continue to give us an error saying that the protection level is too tight for us to be able to use that method. So we're pretty well stuck with our public. So I'm going to go back to my audio CD, make it public. And then one last thing to try for Jackson, and really for all of us, what happens if we take the static keyword out? I'm going to go back to my tester. And now I should have a different kind of error. Oh, I've got some other sort of error. It's like, I don't even know what you're talking about. Do you guys have the same error, or have I messed it up worse? Yeah? I'll just put that back in. Well, it just hates it. Does yours give you a different error?
Mine says an object reference is required for the non-static field.
That's what you should be getting, but I've messed something else up. So I'll put my static back in, and then I'll be able to figure out what else I've messed up maybe. And now it's all happy. So you can tell by me taking that static out, I got some different messages, and I didn't really have anything else messed up, but it was just so confused. Like, I don't even know what in the world you're doing. So by saying that this method was static, we're saying this one method exists in memory, everybody can call it. So let's create some everybody's to call it. I think that's all we needed to look at for our old one. Everything should be working good. Before we close this one, let's make sure where it is. I'm going to right-click on my solution and choose Open Folder and File Explorer. Now I'm going to leave this File Explorer window open because I'm going to want to copy these class files into our new project. I've got it open now. I'm ready. I'm looking at it in File Explorer. I'm going to close out my Visual Studio session, save all my changes. And let's open Visual Studio again. I'm kind of like restarting a computer with Visual Studio, aren't I? If you notice, I like to close it and totally reopen it. It's kind of giving it a fresh start and not having any leftover stuff. Kind of like cleaning out memory on Windows by restarting it. So let's do a new project. And I want my solution name to be Chapter 5. And we're going to do a bunch of our audio CD class stuff in here. So I'm going to make my solution name Chapter 5, Audio CD Class 102. And then the name of our project is going to be a little different. Let's name it 3 Audio CD. And I'm naming it starting with a 3 because our first version was that very first version we did where it was just a console app completely. Our second version was where we took our console app and we added in a class to do our count value. So this is really going to be our third version. And then we'll just keep all of these in this same namespace folder. So for our main, our program.cs, I want to get this file from our old project. So I'm sitting here, I've got File Explorer open, I'm looking at that project, I'm going to go into the folder. And the first thing that I want to copy out of this folder is our tester. Let's try some things. Can I just drag that .cs file and drop it into our project? Will that work?
Yes.
Does it work right?
No.
No. Exactly.
Because the namespace is different.
Well, I think there's some other reasons. Let's see. We're going to try it, though, to see if we can. Yeah, there should be some other things wrong because we don't have everything exactly right yet. Well, I'm going to go to my program.cs, that new one that just got created, and copy my namespace. And then I'll go to my tester, and I can paste it.
Did you have that tester posted somewhere?
Oh, no, I'll put it in the chat for you. Hang on. That's what I meant to do. Doesn't care what.
It's not giving me any errors.
Good. Okay, here's the tester that I'm putting in the chat. And the next thing will be the audio CD class file. So if you need those, grab them from there. Now, before we work with our audio CD file, let's clean some things up a little bit. First of all, program.cs we don't need, so let's delete it. Now, our tester, that's a fine name. I'm going to comment out that's using static right now until we get that class in there. Tester is a fine name. That's what this class does, right, is it tests everything. But I think we can come up with a better name. This class, if you notice, is all of our user interface, right? So if we want to ask the user anything, like for the CD name, we are doing it in this class. If we want to give them any output, we're doing that in this class. So why don't we name this class our user experience class, right? We want to keep these things separate. You guys are already learning to keep things separate. Maybe you don't know it yet, but our user experience, our user front end, we usually want to keep isolated from the business logic that we have in the middle, and we want to keep that isolated from our database back end if possible. We want them all to be like separate layers. So we're working towards being able to do that. We want to keep all this user stuff separate. So let's rename this user EX. I hope some of you guys went to the meetup last night. Did you go see Tim talk about .NET Core? I didn't go, nobody went. Too bad. Now, I still have one error, the CD value calculation. I'm going to comment out that line and then see if I can run this thing. Uh-huh.
Sorry, I just want to make sure that I'm like where you're at. 'Cause I download those files, but they're not coming up in my folder. I got changed the namespace now.
What do you have in Visual Studio?
Well, I've got the free audio CD, and then I've downloaded those 2 files. And I put them in that folder, right?
It won't help. You'll have to drag them to
She just recommended plus tester with yeah, what she did was she went to the program file for the class
And then I
project,
changed the namespace.
tester, and dropped it to free audio CD, and then renamed it.
But I don't need to change that namespace to the same program. Would you want to do that?
Initial program. No, not that one. The one that's in the new audio. Yeah. I mean, you can just do it from the solutions.
It should now. Double click on your phone.
So in my file, I'll just have the tester.
We got one. It looks like it's okay. Close this audio CS file.
So then delete the program, and then want to rename tester. Am I supposed to have audio CD in there too?
Not yet.
Why not tester? Is it the right idea?
Perfect. Good.
Thank you for.
Okay, lots of manipulating. You guys will be so much more successful if you know where all your stuff is. So what I did then, after getting the user experience all set up, I commented out the 2 lines of code that were giving me errors. Up at the top, that using static statement. And then down in the main where I was accessing the calc value. And then I made sure it would run. Because I want to make sure that everything's copied properly and all that stuff since we messed with it a bunch. It's in there. What's the matter?
It's just not showing up my tester. Like I can view it here. It's not here.
Gotcha. He's so helpful. Okay, so we saw that it was okay for us to drag and drop that file onto our project in Solution Explorer. But if we would have just copied that file like from project folder to project folder, it wouldn't have used it properly. And there's a lot of things that change over time. So the safest way for us to add an existing .cs file to Visual Studio is to add it using the Add menu. So again, if I look at my project and right-click and choose Add, instead of saying Class, I can say Existing Item. Now, when I do that, I can navigate to find my old project and find my audio CD class. and add it. Now that put it in there too. So any of those ways are fine. You guys will find a million ways to do things. What's important is that as a programmer, you keep track of all those different pieces and you know where they are and what's going on with them, because otherwise, as you're seeing, things can get kind of messed up and convoluted. Now, in the best world, we would use that audio CD in a different way where we didn't have to copy that source code. We do that in C# too, but we don't get to do that in our class. Now, all these pieces, I was telling the class this morning, I got a friend request yesterday on Yelp. I didn't know there was such thing as friends on Yelp, but I got a friend request on Yelp, and it was from a former student, and he's working at Yelp now. He started about 2 weeks ago, and he's a person who spent a lot of time in my classroom kind of working on his own on Objective-C, and he was one of the first students I ever knew to use GitHub, and he used it religiously from the very beginning because he wanted to keep track of all of his stuff. In Objective-C, you even have more pieces than what we have here with C#. But he was bound and determined that he was going to do some stuff with Apple, and he was going to do some iPhone development. So he did get, I don't know, I think he went to like WWDC, which is Apple's Worldwide Developer Conference, is an invited student. So he got his airfare paid and all of that great stuff, a few $1,000s worth of goodies while he was there. But he never ended up working for him. But he is working at Yelp now. And keeping track of all of those pieces and knowing where all his stuff was what made him be really super successful. This is the guy from Joplin. You guys are right there. You can do all of this. He's a great guy. He had a really hard time taking tests. I'll tell you about it, just a little bit, but he couldn't get a decent score on the ACT. I mean, he was very limited on what his options were for going to college because he just didn't do well at taking tests. But dang, he could figure stuff out. If he looked at a manual for writing an Objective-C or C#, he could figure things out. And that's paid off for him because now he's out in San Francisco working for Yelp. I would assume probably making pretty good money because I don't think they pay really poorly. So these are things that are potentially, if you want them, in your future. But it does take some work and keeping track of all of these little pieces. I say that about Andrew because, like I said, he was the best at keeping track of stuff. He showed me a whole lot about GitHub that I never would have figured out because he was so into making sure he had backups of all of his stuff. All right, so we've got our project here. I'll put together all of our pieces. And I need to fix a couple of things. First of all, in the audio CD, I need to fix the namespace. I'll copy that again and go to my audio CD class and make sure it's the same. And then in my user experience, I had commented out my line that called the CD value method or calc value method. And I'd commented out the using static. So how come it doesn't like it anymore? Different namespace. So that namespace was the first part of that using static. So I'd have to update that to keep that working. So anytime we're looking at where a class comes from, it lives inside of a namespace. So everything should look good. You should be able to run it. Everything should work okay. Let's make sure. Oh my goodness, I'll enter an ID. I decided that I was going to put in album names, the White Album. I'm going to do Beatles albums because I have enough of them. All right, they're $15. Okay, so here's my information about that CD. We started on this the other day saying, this thing is limiting us. We can only put in one CD at a time. So we would like to make it to where we can have many, many CD objects. So we want to make a class that contains their information. So here's the class diagram of what we're going to kind of build. We want to add the data fields to our audio CD class, the data fields that we're keeping track of, like that ID and the name and the number of tracks and all of that stuff. We already have our calc value method in our audio CD class. We were going to create a couple of other special kinds of methods too. Now, when we look at this class diagram, notice what we've got here up at the top. It's showing class fields, the things that we're going to keep track of for each instance of our audio CDs. And then down here, we see all the methods that are available to our audio CD class. So on our audio CD, let's add some fields. I want to add these fields at the very top of my class statement. So these are going to be class fields. Just like a lot of other things in programming, they have a lot of different names. You know, did IBM invent it? Well, if so, then Microsoft came up with a different name, and Compaq came up with a different name. And so we ended up with a whole bunch of different names for the same thing. One of those different names is an instance variable. So this variable can have unique data for each instance of our class. Kind of write our notes here, you know, in our comments. Is it? Okay. Is that better? Now, those instance variables are global. So they're going to be global to our class. We'll be able to access them from any method within our class. That'll make things a little bit easier to code. We won't have to have so many parameters and return values as we had to when we called things from our main. So we want, first of all, a string that's going to be our ID. Oh, that brings up a couple of other things to add to our comments. These class fields or class variables are always private. Of course, you know that's almost always private. We could always find an exception. And their names start with lowercase letters. And the REPL, I think there's a constant. So of course it'll be all in uppercase because that rule overrides. But in general, these are going to be private variables, private to our class, that start with lowercase letters. The next thing we want then is our string that's our name. We want the integer that's going to be the number of tracks on our album. We want the decimal value that's going to be the cost of our album. And then I do want to add an integer for quantity. How many of them do we have? I'm not going to add the artist name and all that extra stuff that we could carry around because it'd just be too much for us to code. So now my class is not got any errors. It has some data and it has this method, but it's existing. So let's go to our user experience, our tester. You need more time?
Yes, please.
Let us know when you're set.
I'm done. I don't-
No problem? Is there something wrong with it?
Oh, no, I'm done. I didn't know if anyone else was seeing it.
Oh, okay, well, that's fine. All right, so we got our class set up. We're gonna go to our tester, our user experience part, and I wanna set a breakpoint. So I wanna set a breakpoint. Oh, I wanna do some other stuff first. Let's, here where we calculate our CD value, I wanna comment that out, and I wanna comment out the line of code where we call our display output. We're going to do those a little bit different as we go, so we don't want to leave them in place. So let's put in some code to create an instance of an audio CD. So our class name is audio CD. The really cool thing about object-oriented programming is once you create a class, it becomes a valid data type. So I can use our class name audio CD as our data type. We're creating something that is the data type audio CD. Let's call it, we'll name it CD1. And it's going to be a new instance of an audio CD. Yes, sir?
It seems to me that you have essentially created an object at risk of not anyone else in the class understanding the term.
Right. Creating an object, that's exactly right.
And we named it CD1.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense? Now, we're going to look at how that object was created. Let's set it up in the debugger. And I would like to stop and set a breakpoint right there where we create that object. So I've got it set. Now I'm going to run my program. And let's see, we'll make this ID, doesn't matter, 47. This album, let's use, this one will be Abbey Road. It's really long, it's like 34 tracks. Let's say $23. Oh, and it just disrupted me and stopped right there. Now, when I look at my debugger, CD information, I have not run this line of code yet. We haven't created this object. But here we can see that we have all of our data filled in properly for all of our variables. CD1, that audio CD object that we're working on creating right now is null. It's not an actual object. So I want to step into our code and execute that line of code. Oh, it did it really fast. And we don't really see anything happen. That's because in our audio CD class, we haven't created a constructor to tell the system how to build one of these objects. So it just used a default. It said, I'll just create an empty audio CD. That must be what they want because they didn't tell me anything different. So it executed that line of code and skipped on past. So now your CD1 object is not null. It's an actual object. If you expand it, you can see that it does have each of the different properties, each of the fields we gave it. They're just all set to default values. So how could we build this CD object in a way so that it had all of our data? Yes, sir?
Probably what I would try to do is pass some parameters to our function here where we make it into an object.
Perfect.
And have a constructor method under that class that says, take these parameters and plug them into these values when we create an object.
Let's do it. So I'm going to stop debugging. And I'm going to go to our CD class. And just like he said, we want to tell the system how to construct an instance of our object. So I'm going to put this right after my quantity field definition in the class. So we're going to construct an instance with a constructor. And I am putting books in here for you so that you'll have the comments and you can put them in your notes or whatever you want to do because I know you don't want these in your normal code. We're going to construct an instance with a constructor. A constructor is a special type of method, and it has no return type. So when you see that test question, a constructor is a method, true or false? It's true, it really is a method, it's just a special type. Now, the special things about it, we usually make them public because we would like other classes to be able to use our class, so they need to be able to access our constructor. And then our constructor has to be named exactly the same as our class. Other than that, it's pretty simple as compared to some of our methods. Now, after we name our constructor, we're going to have to tell the constructor what kind of parameters to expect. Well, we would like a string for our ID. We'd like a string for the name of the album or CD. We'd like an integer to tell us the number of tracks. I'm going to do a comma and press enter to go to the next line because I'm getting so far away. We'd like a decimal value to tell us the cost. And finally, we want an integer to tell us the quantity. Now, I've named these parameters the same as the data, the same as the variable names in our class. We don't have to. They could be completely different names. Either way is fine. Now, how do we match those up? It's not going to happen magically. We have to tell the system that this ID, the ID for this instance that we're creating, can be found in the ID field that was sent in as a parameter. This audio CD's, name can be found in our name parameter. This CD's number of tracks can be found in our number of tracks parameter. So now, if we call or we create an instance of our class, create an object here, we're going to be passing in all of these parameters, and we'll be building an audio CD that has all of the data that it needs. But we need to update our user experience now to call this correctly. Yes, sir?
Before we get too far from
Mm-hmm.
this, I know you were just trying to move on to something else, sorry. Just for the sake of clarifying a little bit, what would the this dot A equals A look like if the parameter under the constructor was indeed named differently from what the actual property was?
No, that's good. I actually did it in the last class, and then some people got messed up. So let's just try it real quick. Let's say for num tracks, I decided it should say NO tracks is a parameter. Then I would just have NO tracks here.
So you're saying this dot property equals parameter?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So just like any other assignment statement, what's on the left of the equal sign is the one we're setting, and we're setting it to the value on the right hand of the equal sign. And that's so important to remember because it's so easy to get them switched.
And they have to be the same though?
They don't have to be the same.
I don't think you even have to feed the parameters directly into the properties either. You could probably have it, if you need to do that for whatever reason, you could probably have it give several parameters and then do a calculation to fill in one property or vice versa.
If you wanted, depending on what you wanted to do.
You can also omit the this statement, so they'll name differently.
Yeah, when they're named differently, you don't have that. This is not as important. So totally up to you how you want to do it. We're going to look at quite a few examples, hopefully, if we have time, of different constructors, because we do, like Donovan is mentioning, have tons of options. Remember, we can overload methods. So I can have 15 of these constructors named audio CD in my class. I can have one that only wants the ID, and I can build an audio CD instance that only has an ID number. It wouldn't help me much, but I could. I could have a constructor that's only wanted name. If we had some weird system feeding us somewhere that could only give us the name, we could make a constructor that would accept that, and then we could do whatever we wanted with it. So we'll create some more of them to get some more experience. Definitely a really good place to experiment. So let's run our program again, because we were doing all of that debugging to see what happens when we create this instance. So if I look at my user experience, now I have an error. I'll turn off this breakpoint so you can see it better. This was working before. What did we mess up?
We're not feeding it parameters.
Right, and once we create a constructor manually in a class, C# will not generate a default constructor for us anymore. So it was generating a default for us, but then we created one, so it's like, oh, you're on your own now. Okay, so what do we need to pass it? We need to pass it our ID, our name, number of tracks, our cost, and then our quantity. Do we have a quantity? We're gonna have to go get one. It's mad at me about some of my other variable names. Let me fix them. So I have an ID. My name, of course, I was having trouble with, my album. So with our quantity, let's add that real quick. I'm gonna add a variable for it. Int qty equals 0.
But now you're using album?
That's just what this name was up here in the prompt.
So even under the object construction, it doesn't have to be anything like that?
No, as long as it's in the right position, it'll just pass it in. So we'll see that. So create a quantity variable for me, an integer. To load our quantity, we're going to call our input int and send in qty is our prompt. That should take care of that quantity that we're missing. Now let's set that breakpoint back on our on calling. Oh, now we're sending everything to it. See if it's happier. It doesn't really matter. It just gives us something different to look at as we debug it. So let's see, we'll make this one 3. This one we'll do helter skelter. There's only one of those. All right, now I'm at my constructor and I'm here in the debugger right where I was before, and I see that I have values for all my variables, and my CD1 object is null. I haven't instantiated it yet. Last time when we did the step into, we just went to the next line of code. This time, we're going to go into our class. Okay, so here we are now. We've gone into our class. We're at our class constructor. Right? If we moused over our parameters, we'd be able to see what their values are and all that kind of stuff. Make sure we had everything loaded properly. If we were having some sort of problem that we were trying to debug, we'd be able to check all that. That looks good, so I'm going to step into again, and I should see it begin my constructor. As I continue on, the first line of code will take this ID that we passed in, which is 3. Our ID in our object is null, so after we run this line of code, they should be the same. 3, 3. We'll set up our name, set our number of tracks, our cost, our quantity. Now, when we look at our locals here, we still have all those variables that we sent in, but notice the this. The this object is that audio CD that we're currently constructing. So it hasn't been given a name yet, it's still this. And if you look at it, if you expand that, you should see now its cost and ID and everything has been properly set. You're copying everything down right. So now I should be able to continue executing. And I'm back to my user experience. And now if I look up my user experience, I have the CD1 object, but it's still null. I have to actually finish executing that line of code before it gives me values. Now my CD1 object exists completely. If I expand it, I'll see all of the class variables that have been set up for that instance. Questions?
The other ones are still set to the same thing.
The variables that are in our main? Yeah, they were unaffected. So we're just using them to pass into that class. Get all that stuff all set up for us. So try it again. Get yourself where you're feeling a little more comfortable with what's going on here. Look at your debugger. Notice how things are matching up. Change some things if you want to see if you can make a difference or understand something better, because that's what we want. Okay, so that constructor that we put in is everything. We could put a constructor in, like I said, that only accepted a few things, that didn't care about anything. Let's create our own constructor that has no arguments. I'm going to stop here. So let's go back to our audio CD class. And right below this constructor that we created, let's create a new one. We're going to call this the no arg constructor. So it's going to be public, name audio CD, and then it's not going to have any parameters at all. So this will be exactly the same as what the system ran for us when we didn't have a constructor at all. It created a default no arg constructor for us, and it said, okay, I'll create an instance of your class with nothing. Well, instead of us doing that, let's give it some values. So what about if we say the ID equals, we'll make it something that sticks out, like FF, because it's invalid. We'll say that our name is default CD name. We'll set our number of tracks to 99. What about cost? What would be a good default cost to show that things aren't exactly right here? We could leave it 0 because we don't really want to mess up some sort of important report. And we'll leave our quantity at 0. So now we've said, if somebody tries to create an instance of an audio CD and they don't supply any data, this is the data we're going to use. We'll just make it all default. So let's look at our user experience class. I'm going to copy this line of code where we create our instance of our audio CD. And let's create another one. We'll call it CD2. And for this one, I don't want any parameters. We'll just leave it all empty. Now we can debug on that one. We don't need to run the debugger through our first CD because we've seen what goes on there, but you sure can if you want to. So let's try using this one. I'll put in some data. Now, it says that it's ready to run this constructor to build my audio CD. I've got 2 CDs here. CD1 is already built. I'll expand it. Oh, it's got all my stuff in it, my data. CD2 isn't built yet. It's null because I'm sitting here at the line of code that's going to execute that. So I'm going to go ahead and use my step into to see what happens there. Now it's going through. It's going to set the ID to Fox. It's going to set the name to that default value, number of tracks, cost, quantity, etc. So you should be able to see CD2 having all of those default values. So remember, these CDs aren't things we can see in memory. We can't see them as well. So if you thought about the spheres or something that we were emitting, each of those spheres would have properties, these values associated with it, like its color and its trajectory and its force and it's all of those different momentum things. We just have hidden things because we're talking about this thing that's only in memory. It's a little harder to visualize, but we have all of the characteristics saved for each of these CDs now. 2 of them, right? So we're keeping track of them. Questions?
Can you go back to the audio CD one?
Sure.
Mine didn't work out.
Oh, okay, yeah. Let me see if I can get there. Stop running, it'll help. There you go.
It just says under CD2, it says the value is null. And it doesn't have like a drop down or anything.
For
CD2.
Are you gonna debug it?
Yes.
Do one more.
There we go.
all right, so the other things we wanted to change, we've added some methods to our class here. We've got our constructors built. I would like for this class to output information about the instance that we're working with. So we want to create a special method that's called the toString. Whenever we're working in C#, anytime we create a class, it is said to inherit from the system object. So anytime we create an object, it's going to get some information about objects themselves from C#. One method that the system object has is called the toString, and we can actually override that method to output information about our object. So let's go to our user experience code first and see what kind of information we get now. So for our first audio CD, I'm going to put in a write line that says I want to write information about CD1. And for my second one, I'm going to put in a write line that I want to write some information about CD2. I'm going to get rid of this debugger breakpoint because I don't need it right now. And I'm going to run my program. Well, whenever I did those write line statements, it didn't give me stuff like the quantity or anything. It just gave me the namespace name and the class name. Kind of that thing we put in our using static, huh? So that wasn't very helpful. But that's the default toString output. So for us to get something different out of our program, we need to override it. So we already have some good output going on in our display output method. So let's go cut that because we don't want it anymore in our user experience class. So start at the very beginning of our comments here. And I want to select everything down to the end of this display output method. And I'm going to cut it. Should be gone completely from our user experience class. So now I'm going to go to my audio CD class where I want to put it. Getting so many comments, I got to get to the right place. It's kind of messy. So I'm going to put this right after this new audio CD constructor we just made, but I'm not going to paste it yet. I want to get ready. I lied. I'll go ahead and paste it. Lying to you. So this display output method worked good for us. We have everything. I don't know why we have to do it different. We have to do it different because we're using classes and objects, and we want to do it the object-oriented way. So I'm going to create a new method header right above the method header we have so that you can see the difference. First of all, this is going to be public. It's going to be an override. And an override means you're going to find something previously in the class structure, the system object, that has the same name, and I want this to take its place. We're going to return a string, and our method is named toString. Now I'm going to delete this old method header that we had for our display output. Now our toString can access all of our variables here in our class. So it doesn't need all those parameters to be passed to it. It'll be able to get to them. Now I'm going to have to fix some of these names though, because I have some different cases and some things like that. So I'll make my ID be lowercase like I made it in my class. Make that be name. Now I don't have anything about this CD value yet, so I'm going to comment that line out because we want to fix it last. So we've created this whole message string that contains all this information about our audio CD object. Instead of writing it out in our class, we're going to use the return statement and say just return this message if somebody asks for my information, my string information. So I've even heard people say the toString method is a way to view the class as a string, which is kind of a weird way to put it. I had a hard time understanding those instructions, but it might be meaningful too. So now when I do a write line of my class names, so everybody got that? Looking at my user experience class, when I do my write line messages, statements, I should get some different data than just the name, namespace and class name. Let's run it. Now I'm only asking for data once because our other stuff is in our defaults. Yellow submarine, anything you want. So now our toString method is returning the information about our CD object. CD1 is all of this stuff about yellow submarine, bless you. CD2 is all our default stuff. Let's put it in the debugger. Let's run it. See what's going on.
I have red lines all over the place.
What's the matter?
I don't know. I cut, pasted.
Oh, can we put you on the share? Can you share? I'm stopping. Okay, see if you can share so everybody can fix ya. There he is. Yep, hang on. Okay, okay. Show them what you got.
here's words from the stuff that we was doing,
Uh-huh.
and I got all these things. Look, this is thing. Yeah.
So,
I need to add that thing up here, huh?
yeah, you want using static system.console. Or alternatively, you could go to all those read and write commands and add.
Wait. All those things should be in your test, or they shouldn't be in your audio CD class. Make sure you're in the right place before you add stuff. You're not in the right place. Control Z, man. Control Z a few times. Lots of times. However many times it takes.
Well, this is gonna take a while, so I'll just pause myself and I'll work.
No, I think you're okay if you Control Z.
Well, no, he's still got user experience and tester. He has to do mine.
Ah.
I have a comment about finishing as well, where it was the return message error.
Yeah, he's missing all that.
Yeah, the only thing there is that you haven't defined what message is. You've declared it as a variable, but you haven't put anything in.
Yeah, I just started on it, yeah.
Okay, all right then.
But yeah, I appreciate it. I mean, you know, stuff works and shit.
He's getting there.
Okay.
He's done. He says, no way. Control Z, don't forget, is your most important friend. If you get a bunch of red lines after you do something, always Control Z. It's not a mean thing. It's just what happens sometimes when it goes wacky on you. Okay, so let's watch us then. I'm going to go ahead and run the debugger because I want you guys to see that I'm going to put in my album. Really big number. And then our default album, oh, I'm sitting here staring at it going, what's it doing? If we go to right line, CD2, I'm going to step into, it goes straight into our class to the toString method. It starts running the toString method. When we get to the end of it, it returns back to the right line method that called us by instance name. Now, this would be exactly the same as if I put cd2 dot toString. ToString is the default method that gets run by a class. Now, if I didn't Control Z too much, I would like to do one last thing before we go into lab time, and that's make this thing loop. I'm going to get rid of these two lines that create CD2. No CD2, he's gone. And I want to create a loop, kind of like the hypergrade assignment. So I'm going to put a do statement up here at the top with an open curly brace. I also need a string variable to be my answer, and I'm going to set it equal to an initial value of uppercase Y. Now, in this do loop, I want to prompt my user for the ID. I want to prompt my user for the album, the number of tracks, the cost, the quantity. I want to create that CD instance, and I want to write out the information about it. I can get rid of this comment here that I don't need anymore. Now I want to do all that stuff while our answer equals uppercase Y, or our answer equals lowercase y. And since that's a weirdo do while, it's mad at me. Oh, okay, it's just complaining. Loop control variable is never changed inside loop. It's true. Got to fix that. So the while part should end with a semicolon and should not be indented, so we can tell where it ends. And
don't we need to ask them again?
yeah, that's what we need to do. So right here, let's do that. Do what? Oh, it actually, yes. Okay, so we're going to write out the message. You want another. Read that into our answer. And then my closing curly brace there should fix everything up. So now that should give us a loop to be able to create instances of our CDs. Yes, sir?
A mildly related question.
Uh-huh.
Is there a way to tell it to take whatever answer gets plugged in by the user and just tell it to make it all caps or low caps instead of having it check explicitly for uppercase or lowercase?
Uh-huh.
Because then if we wanted to check for a word and if we decide we don't care about the capitalization, then that way we can tell it just make it all lowercase, and that way we can ignore the capitalization of the user.
Yep, you could do that, but Hypergrade won't take it, so I'm not going to show you. Because we're going to have people that use it and then send me all sorts of nasty emails about Hypergrade getting mad about it. So until we can get those Hypergrade people to fix their stuff, or until we're done using Hypergrade. So bring that up again, because it's super important. They're just not supporting it. Okay, so now can I add another? Should be able to keep going. Now, does it stop right when we want it to stop? Eventually. So how could we do that, Donovan? Can you find it and show us? What could we do? I could probably just search for C#2 upper and see if that's something that exists. And of course, the beautiful Microsoft documentation gives us lots of different examples. Not really, be sarcastic here. But right here we can see that we can do string 1.2 upper. We're not going to be able to do that in our console.read line though, because it's not a string. So we'd have to actually do that on our answer variable.
On a separate line.
Yeah.
Which I guess is probably fine though.
Yeah, we could do that if we wanted to. So we could do answer. Whoops, got it. Anonymous pipe server.
What?
That was really long. And whenever since answer is a string, the beauty of IntelliSense says if you put a dot after a string, it's basically going to show you all of the string class methods. So we should be able to see there the 2 upper, 2 lower, pad right, pad left. So anytime you're curious about that, you can actually find what the names of them are here in IntelliSense and then Google with a little bit more knowledge, you know, that's the name of the method that we're looking for a little bit of information about. So sometimes these lists are so long that they can be a little bit overwhelming. But if we just focus on the specific things that we're looking for, we can usually find what we want.
You can also do the .2 upper on the answer email condition.
Oh yeah, that would work so that we didn't need another line there. That would work. So try it, but don't be too super surprised if Hypergrade throws up at you. I don't know why it can't handle some stuff. I mean, I do know they're using that different compiler, and there must have been an upgrade to that open source compiler in the past couple weeks because there's problems in REPL and Hypergrade both. So if you run into problems working on this class in REPL, let me know because it does seem like it's having some issues, and some of the sample programs that I put out there for it are not working now. So something has changed with their compiler. So let me know if you're having trouble. Be watching your email because if I do get information from a lot of people about there being trouble with it, I'll let you guys know So please don't be out there, you know, beating your head up against a wall and not looking at announcements, because I'll definitely post something. I mentioned that one day. I asked one of the Career Center guys, I said, well, did you look at your announcements or check your email? And he said, well, I don't normally do that. Like, well, you know, I can't really do anything for that then. So you gotta check. Because I can't communicate with you otherwise, and if there's problems, I want to let you know so you're not beating your head up against the wall. Any questions about this? It's a really big area. We're just getting started. So if you're feeling good about parts of it, that's good. Any others? Okay, lab time, not a whole bunch, but get started on the rebels and let me know if you're having issues so we can try to figure out what's going on with that. Definitely not what we want.